right. Well, with that, let's get into it. So, over the years, we've developed a lot of different diagrams to help contractors see and visualize the business a lot differently. And so, you've made an incredible amount of additions and nuances and applications to these over the years since you joined the team. So I'd love if you kind of walk through these the next half dozen slides or so, and then let's pulling out stories and talk about pros and cons and good and bad and funny and all that.
Well, I tell you, the first story is when I first saw a rendition of this information right here, where we go with the talk about these big inflection points. I looked at this thing, I thought my head was going to explode. There is so much good information here, but again, depending on where you are in any one of these kind of size ranges of an organization, uh, it is very overwhelming to look and see all this information. And really, just what this slide is telling us is, if you look at all of the growth, the people growth, right, going from 5 people to the far left, right, 5 people, you are building most likely one job at a time. You're taking your whole crew, you're going to the next job. Uh, and the ideal growth from 5 to 15 people to 50 people to 150 is that very nice, smooth green line, right? Because that's what we believe is going to happen. It's like, oh yeah, we're just going to go from one job to the next, and then we'll start to grow and we'll add a few people. But the actual growth that happens, right, is just vastly different. Working with one contractor, they had grown from in volume, they'd grown from, about 3 million, so relatively small, but they'd grown from 3 million to, geez, 5 or 5.5 million in about a year. And they had the problem of going from, the 15 to the 50 people. And it was a massive failure for years. And when I started working with them, we started to dissect that, right? Same thing as, the rockets in the air. Started to dissect what was happening. And it was one of those where, we just didn't have the people count right. We didn't have the right people to run the right jobs, because the owner could no longer look at all of them that were happening at once. It wasn't just 1 or 2 jobs right across the street. It was 5 or 6 jobs or 8 jobs, and they were all across town and in a different county. And, they just lost control of it, because they just didn't see that inflection point coming, right? They went from what was about 15 people to, really, they didn't add as many. They just added volume because they could. And it distracted the owner, it distracted the foreman, and all of that focus you could see was kind of falling apart. And now they went back to about 3.5 million. They'll do about 4 this year, with more deliberate, right? More of the, um, maybe not quite green line on here, but certainly a little bit better than the yellow line for them, because they've actually planned for this, decided what they're going to take, what they're not going to take. But most people just don't see these inflection points, because it's not necessarily about building the work when you're looking at it from the large scale, right? You back up and look at it. And I mean, David, you see it all the time as well, right? They get to that, and the biggest one is usually that 150 to the 500, because that's just such a large leap that it really does kind of catch people off guard. That it's more than getting that next job. It's more than hiring that next person. It is about the systems around it. It's about the strategy. It's about what markets do we want to be into? What geography do we want to be into? And it's just an entirely different thing. So, yeah, David, I'm sure you've got many, many stories as well.
Well, yeah, when you were talking through that, I was just going back and I was reflecting on even like one of my first inflection points as a manager over project managers. and this is kind of a systems thing. I just didn't know it. I didn't call it that at the time. Didn't have the language or the knowledge, but pretty deliberate on following up. I mean, project managers have logs for everything, including change orders. And so one of the things that I was always diligent on was reviewing all of where they were at with their change orders, which looked at the time of opening up every change order log and really reviewing it, what changes have been made, digging in, doing some spot checking on the documentation that may be in the network and the file structures and everything. And then we grew, and so then that activity started taking longer and longer. And then of course, hard worker, we're stupid, right? We're coming in at 5 a.m. on a Saturday, so that's no different than being a contractor. So then I'm sitting there one Saturday reviewing all the change orders, and it literally dawns on me that it's lunchtime. I'm getting hangry, and I'm realizing that I just don't even have enough time in a Saturday to open and close, and not even really study. I mean, because then that's the point where you're just like opening it, kind of glancing at it and closing it. You're managing by exception. You're not really, which is kind of not managing. And I didn't even have enough time to do that, just with the number of projects that we had going on, the number of project managers, so on and so forth. And so then that made me recognize I needed a different system. I needed some different summary level information. I needed a different person to go check, because a lot of times what you end up doing is bypassing the control. So instead of spending 30 minutes really studying the change order log for a project manager and asking them good questions and things like that, you just kind of glance at it like, looks okay, which
Yeah.
is not really quality control or quality assurance. And so then now you're bypassing that control. And if there's no problem, no big deal. It can go on and on and on. However, one single problem with one change order, unpaid or turns
Yeah.
into a claim or something like that, can cost you, hundreds of times, what the cost of the quality control, quality assurance was. So that was my first inflection point. And then I was thinking of the second thing, which you describe it really well in a very graphic terms of we're there on a regular basis to grab that contractor and pull their head up off the desk for just one one block of time, whether that's the 2 hour meeting that we get into with them every couple of weeks or something, if it's a coaching session, or if it's the 1 day a month, which is more of our typical engagement. You're pulling them up to kind of work on the business and look ahead. And the note that I jotted down was that we're doing really three things. We're helping plant the seeds. If, so let's say they're at stage 3, we're planting some seeds for what stage 5 looks like.
Yeah.
We're not doing anything, but that's where the learning aspect is going on, trying to take their minds there to see if their minds are even going there, and help keep them there. And that's 5 or 10%. That's the learning aspect. But that allows us to back up and say, okay, we're really planning for stage 4. That's where we're heading. And then we
Right.
spend a chunk of time with the continuous improvements based on the current stage that they're at, because you have to keep building the projects, you have to keep the machine running. And that those were the things that came to me while we were talking through this, but that could just be the coffee talking. But
Well, and it's funny because what that just made me think of one more thing is, we work with a lot of contractors that are, the 50, 150, or they're like 80, and they're going from stage 3 to stage 4.
right.
They know they're kind of topped out with what they're doing right now, and they're just kind of sitting in that little question mark, right, with the
Yeah.
circle. They're kind of sitting there not knowing what to do. It's interesting because when you go over to the right-hand side, you've got those 1,500 people or more. There's a lot of people inside those organizations that sometimes feel lost. They're maybe the ones that are going to go out and start their own company. But the ones that are in the 1,500, really, if I had to give anybody some advice there, step back and look at what the organization is doing and watch it kind of breathe as you go to these bigger jobs. Watch them scale up, watch them scale down, because you've got the opportunity to really see what a construction company does on a regular basis. You just happen to see it get really, really big and then really, really small again as a project goes through its life. And I think sometimes we've got some newer people or some middle managers that again, they're so busy wanting to build the work, they're not paying attention to the systems around them and what that could mean for them, right? Because you're just really, it's like those hierarchies are showing in that 1500 block. You're living each one of those on different projects, very possibly. So there's some
Yeah.
lessons to be learned for people in the 1500 block too. It's not just
But
for the managers, right? There's a
yeah,
lot to
to
be learned there.
study the machine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Lots to
I,
know.
I think one last note on those inflection points is oftentimes at those inflection points, the contractor, the outcomes, and we'll talk about outcomes here in a bit, but the outcomes are better than they've ever been before because they, if with a little bit of luck, and remember it is luck. So for instance, that example I just gave, if I would have just bypassed and said, well, I don't have time to do this, so I'm just going to kind of glance over these, change order logs. And then the next stage after that is I'm not even glancing over them because I'm focused on winning work and building projects. As long as nothing's going wrong, the business is making more money than it's ever made before at that stage because I've taken out all the quality control, which is a cost. I've taken out the quality assurance, which is a cost. I've taken out the deliberate management and development of people, which is a cost. Right? Those are all costs. They do have a return, but the return is not usually in the next year. The return is a longer term thing, and one big claim on a project, one bad project can wipe out, can take 3 years of great above benchmark profits and turn you into below average.
Mhm.
And building a business, building a life, building retirement, it's more about consistency over time rather than big highs, big lows. So
Yeah,
so
it's the
anyhow,
long game. It's the long game.
it's the long game.